But yeah, just to get started, so my name is David, and I'm the director of the language school here in Denver, Colorado. We teach adults how to speak English and Spanish. And I do this as a weekly tutoring session just for our students and for the community to bring people together to practice the language that they're learning. It's open to English learners and Spanish learners, so there may be somebody else that joins us. The goal of today's meeting is really to be tutoring. So the idea with tutoring is you're enrolled or you're studying somewhere, but there are certain concepts or parts of the language you're just not quite understanding, you're struggling with, or you have, specific questions. So it's a completely open format for you to really ask me any questions that you have.
Great.
Yeah. So I'll turn it over to you. How can I help you today?
Bueno, en mi clase en educación comunidad aquí en Minneapolis, estudiamos pretérito. Y entiendo mucho, pero para mí es muy difícil las irregulares. Los verbos irregulares en pretérito.
Okay, muy bien. So that definitely is something that I can help you with here today. What about you, Tommy? Do you have anything in particular you want to learn today?
Absolutamente. Tengo muchos problemas con los. Where do you put late? I don't understand where those all go.
Okie dokie. Cool. I'm going to start with that one, actually.
Sí.
Okay. Can you see my whiteboard here?
Yes.
Okay. So these are called pronouns, Tommy. And in Spanish, we have something called a direct object pronoun and an indirect object pronoun. Okay? So the best way to explain this here, back up a little bit. So our direct object pronouns, we've got, this is where we have the lo or the la in the singular form, or the los or the las in the plural form. And in the direct object pronouns, we typically have the le or the les. Okay? Are you able to see all this okay?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, perfect.
Can I jump in with a quick question?
Yes.
For instance, let's say I want to buy them. So I can say, quiero los comprar or quiero comprarlos. So.
Okay, I'm going to get to that.
Okay, thank you.
I'll definitely get to that. So kind of to start this conversation, like, oh boy, where's my thing here? Select. Sorry, this whiteboard. I've been looking into different whiteboard solutions so I can use like a tablet to draw on or something. Okay, so the direct object pronoun typically is what would translate in English to the word it in the singular form, and then them in the plural form. The indirect object pronoun can translate into to him, to her, to you in the usted form. And then in the plural form, it can be to them, or to you all, like the plural form of you, the ustedes form, right? So the I guess this is where we really get into grammar. So a direct object pronoun directly receives the action of the verb. So like a really simple way of saying this would be yo como el burrito, okay? In this type of sentence, el burrito directly receives the action of the verb. It is, you know, if you were to ask the question, what are you eating? Oh, I'm eating it. I'm eating the burrito, okay? So it's directly correlated. The subject is the person that does the action, and then the burrito is what is being consumed by the action, okay? So el burrito is going to be masculine. So we're going to replace that with the masculine pronoun lo. Now, remember, saying yo in Spanish is optional. You don't have to actually say yo. You could just say lo como. You can only use these when we've already identified what we're talking about. So you can't just start off a conversation by saying lo como. You have to, at some point in the conversation, identify what you're talking about. And then you start replacing these things with the word, with the direct object pronoun, once you've established the context of the conversation, okay? And so what you just asked me, Tommy, was what happens when you have multiple verbs in the sentence. You've got two options in terms of sentence structure in Spanish. You can put the lo quiero comer, or you can say quiero comerlo, okay? It cannot come in between the two verbs. It either has to come before the first conjugated verb or attached as part of the infinitive.
Okay.
Is that answering your question?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. I know Duolingo doesn't really do a very good job of explaining that. But once you have somebody explain it to you, it's fairly simple. You know, again, with Spanish, it's typically like what I always tell my students from day number one. It's not that hard. You just have to think backwards. So
yeah, that is the hard part, though, when you're trying to speak it.
Right. I say that halfway joking because you got to think backwards. Like, how many people could say the alphabet backwards?
All right.
It's impossible, you know. So I say it halfway jokingly. Typically speaking, so like this is a perfect example. We normally say I eat it, so it follows the verb that we're using. In Spanish, it typically has to come before the verb that you're using. Okay, except for in the event of more of a complex sentence where we're using multiple verbs in a row. So quiero comer, necesito comer, pienso comer, something like that, where you have the option of putting it on the front or the back. And I hear native Spanish speakers say it both ways. It's not like there's a preference to how to say it. It's not that one way is better than another to say it or anything like that. It's just grammatically, they're both on the table for us. Okay?
Yes.
And then, so like to get into the, let's see here if I can just pull this off to the side. And then, so if I want to get into the indirect objects, okay, so I might say something, and I'm just using as simple phrases as possible. So I might say, yo escribo una carta a mi mamá, right? So that's saying I write a letter to my mom. We've got both. Let me back this up a little bit.
No, that's going to be a very good example. I like this.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to back it up just to give you a little bit more of a simple example. So I could say, yo escribo mi mamá. Okay, so now this example only, yo le escribo a mi mamá. In this example, we have only an indirect object, okay? So the indirect object is my mother. We don't have the direct object identified in this first example, but we can imagine that my mom is receiving whatever I am writing, right? So we don't have to kind of help you make sense of this, if I say, what are you writing? We don't know what I'm writing. I could be writing a text message, I could be writing a poem, I could be writing a letter, I could be writing anything. We don't know what the direct object is when I say just yo le escribo a mi mamá. Technically speaking, grammatically speaking, so mi mamá is the indirect object. Le is the corresponding indirect object pronoun. And you're supposed to use, like, the more important piece to this is to use the pronoun. In Spanish, you have to use le along with the a mi mamá. The a mi mamá part is optional. The more grammatically correct thing to say here is yo le escribo. Of course, if we're starting a conversation, we have to identify who we're talking about again, okay? So, you know, technically, if you were just to say yo escribo a mi mamá, you're missing the le part. You actually need to have that le there, okay? But once we've identified who we're talking about, then we could see a sentence like this, yo le escribo. All right? Again, the indirect object pronoun needs to come before the verb that is conjugated.
I'm sorry, David, let me ask, okay, on your 2 sentences at the top, you're saying that the more correct one is the top one, yo le escriba a mi mamá.
That's correct, yes.
But the second one would be understood, just not grammatically correct.
It would be understood, yeah. And you'll hear native speakers speak this way. It's technically missing something. Okay. So yeah, the third sentence is technically more correct than the second sentence.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Now, if we go down to this next example here, now we've got an even more complex sentence still, where we've got we have a direct object and we have an indirect object. What do I write? I write a letter. To whom or for whom is the letter? It's for my mom. That was another thing I didn't put in the translation. It can mean to him or for him. It means, le means to or for in this situation. Okay? Now, so now here's an interesting one for you. We have una carta, which should be la. Okay? Now we've got mi mamá, which should be le. So you would think we would say yo le la. So the indirect object pronoun in this type of situation, the indirect object pronoun comes before the direct object pronoun. So it should be yo le la escribo. However, this is incorrect.
Really?
Yeah. We can't have a le la in Spanish. So in this situation, we have to replace le with se, just to make it that much more fun for you.
Yes.
So we also have se is used. Se is typically what's called a reflexive object pronoun, but in this particular situation, it's just it's a funky little grammar rule about Spanish that you can't have a lela or a lelo. So it would have to be yo se la escribo.
You just earned your keep today, David. Thank you.
I try. Oops.
Most helpful.
I didn't want to do that here. Okay. Sorry, I guess I don't have like a, oh, I could do it like this.
Very good. Very good.
Right.
Well,
Yeah. So that's correct. Okay. So again, and kind of back to what you were asking earlier, Tommy. Let's see. How do I get back? This Zoom whiteboard thing just drives me crazy the way it works. It makes it very hard to. All right. Now, if we wanted to add again a second verb here, so I could have something like yo quiero escribir. Yo le quiero escribir una carta a mi mamá. All right, again, we have the same option in this situation where we could also say yo quiero escribirle una carta a mi mamá. And then if we get into using the pronouns, yo se la quiero escribir, or yo quiero escribir se la. And so now those two can come attached on the end of the verb infinitive again.
did you know this, Sally?
Yes, I did. I've had the lesson, but of course, it's, as I said, it's difficult, especially to speak it. I do much better reading, and I would translate that in reading when I read something, but to formulate the sentence using an indirect and direct object pronouns in the same sentence is difficult for me.
I'm very pleased.
And so just so you know, the correct sentence structure here is the indirect, whenever you have these two coming together, in terms of the pronouns, I just thought of something that makes this, sorry. Sometimes I get in my head there. So in terms of the pronouns, the structure is always indirect object coming before the direct object. Whether or not it comes from the in the beginning or at the end. It is not correct to say yo la se quiero escribir. You can't say it that way. It has to be yo se la quiero escribir or yo quiero escribírsela. Okay. However, in like the formal, in the long form of it, right? So this le corresponds with mi mama over here. And we can see here the direct object needs to come directly after the verb if we do the full sentence structure, and then the indirect object comes after that. Okay?
Could you also say then, I'm sorry, yo quiero escribirlo a mi mamá without using the indirect?
You really need the indirect object there.
Okay.
Quiero escribírselo.
Yep.
And then you can throw on the a mi mamá to clarify exactly who you're talking about. But grammatically speaking, at least the way that I was taught it grammatically, like formally, academically in the university, that the indirect object pronoun is supposed to be there 100% of the time. I hear native speakers that would say it the way that you just said it there, Tommy. So, and then, when I ask them about that, they'll say, oh, it really doesn't, but they're not Spanish professors. So I defer to my Spanish professors from college that have told, similar to the way we frequently don't use grammatically correct English when we're talking to people, little things like that might be said or left off or whatever. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. And so, the hard part about this is that you have to get comfortable with when to use it. And when you're like typically you know, kind of with your level of Spanish right now, you're probably not getting into very long exchanges of conversations with people. But you might think of something like, you know, when you go out to order food at a Mexican restaurant or something like that. So imagine you want to order a steak, right? And so I say, hola, ¿en qué le puedo servir? And you say, deseo ordenar el bistec. Now I might respond to you, ¿cómo lo deseas preparado? ¿Cómo lo deseas preparado? Ah, lo deseo bien hecho. ¿Sí? Que, it's hard to think of examples like this on the fly, but that's like one practical situation. But a good way to practice this is just to write your own sentences, you know, where think about how, you know, think about some common things that you might say, like going to order food in a restaurant or traveling in a hotel, on an airline, something like that. Or another thing I like to do, because we do live in a day and age where we do a lot of communication over email, is you can go back through some, like your most recent 10 emails and look for where you're using the word it, or to him or to her, and then just start working on translating those phrases into Spanish to make it practical and make it relevant to the conversation that you're really having every day. Is that helpful?
Buen idea.
Yeah, buen idea.
Okay. Is it okay if I erase all of this, or do you have any other questions here? The only other thing, just to make it a little bit more complicated, is we also have the direct object and the indirect, like it's a little bit more confusing in the third person like this because we have so many options. One hard thing is, so we still have, I can be, or like in English we'd say me, I can be the direct object, like a person can be the, like you or me can be also a direct object or an indirect object. And in those situations, it's going to be with the word may. Here's a really common one that nobody really knows how or why that it exists. But have you ever wondered why you say me gusta el fútbol instead of yo gusto el fútbol?
Is it because me gusta really means is pleasing to? So
Because
that would be football is pleasing to me, not really that I like football.
that's exactly right, Sally. So I could say, me gusta el fútbol, me gustan los equipos de España. In this situation, el fútbol is the subject. What Sally just said is correct. You actually cannot say like in the Spanish language. You can only say please. And so when you're saying something like this, you would say football is pleasing to me. In this situation, I am the indirect object. I'm the one that's receiving the pleasure that's provided from the game of soccer. And so that's why gusta is conjugated in the third person, because the third person is the subject here, versus if I wanted to say I like the teams from Spain, I would say me gustan los equipos. So gustan in this situation, the an corresponds to los equipos. Okay. So that's another really common one that you almost everybody learns it from day one or very early on in their career. And people typically carry that question with them. Why isn't it gusto, right? And that's just the way the Spanish language works presently.
Yep.
Muy bien. Okay, so now to help out with Sally with her question about the preterite.
Sí, especialmente los verbos preterito irregulares.
Sure. So this is just typically, Sally, like a matter of memorization here, right?
Sí.
So when I like to learn verbs and teach verbs, I like to do it based off of how they work conversationally.
Mhm.
So we've got, have you started learning the past tense at all, Tommy?
Yes.
You have? Okay, cool. So this will help you too then. So the first rule is to learn the endings, right? So just like you're learning the conjugations in the present tense,
Mhm.
you just learn these in the past tense. So when I say learn these conversationally is in a question, this is how it works. You're going to ask, a question, hablaste con la profesora. And then you're going to answer the question, sí. Hablé con la profesora. Right?
Sí.
So that's how the dynamic works. Learning the whole big verb chart like that, do it if you want to. Once you're getting into the preterite, you've kind of learned how verb charts work, so that it's fine to do it. But initially, I always like looking at the way things work conversationally. So in the third person, in the L or the ella form, it's just an O ending, right?
Mhm.
So, and then the cool thing about this is that the answer is the same. So you could say, for example, Tommy habló con Sally. And it's the same in the answer. Sí.
Mhm.
Tommy habló con Sally. So that's the way that those two conjugations interact with each other, right?
Mhm.
So learn those. I always say start. The most important is going to be the yo and the to form. That's what's going to get you by in the 90% of your Spanish conversations. Somebody's going to ask you a question and you're going to answer it in the to and the yo form. Okay.
Mhm.
In terms of the irregular, the irregular verbs, Sally, there's a handful of verbs that typically tend to be irregular, and they're typically irregular like in the present tense, in the past tense, and in the future tense. In the command forms, they're just typically speaking almost always the common ones here. So I'm just going to bring up kind of a so this is just a list that you can just Google this stuff, right? The irregular verbs in Spanish. And so what it means is it doesn't follow the normal verb conjugation in one way or another. Okay? In the in the present tense, we have a verb like venir, where it's a stem changing verb, and it also in the first person you add a G, right?
Vengo.
Yo vengo, tú vienes, él viene, nosotros venimos, ellos vienen. It doesn't follow that regular verb chart where you're only changing the AR endings. Something else has to take place in those endings. And we see the same thing here in the preterite, where on top of so venir is going to have the same endings as an IR, as an ER or an IR, but then the stem is also going to change in it as well. And there's really no other way to do it, I think, other than just memorize.
Yep.
Memorize it, work with those conjugations. But if you have memorized them in the present tense, just know that those are also typically speaking the same ones in the command form as they are in the preterite as well.
Okay.
And I just put those on a separate card and you know, study them separately.
Mhm.
And practice them, you know, practice them. Read, write, do little activities like that. You know, if you, you know, I guess Duolingo has, and some probably the more kind of intermediate level exercises, they have stuff like that.
Yeah.
But what, you know, they don't really do a very good job of explaining it. So you'll be doing the activities and you're like, hable, hablaste, camine, caminaste, vine. What? Why is it vine?
Yeah.
And, you know, so just, does that make sense?
Yes. And I sometimes Google for drills,
Mm-hmm.
Spanish drills on, and then whatever subject it is.
Yeah.
And sometimes they give a little introduction with some background. And then they'll also offer some quizzes so you can kind of test. Another website our Spanish teacher here told us about is Conjugamos. Conjugamos?
Okay. Yeah, I'm not 100%
Conjugamos.
with that one, but yeah,
Mhm.
there's a million and one.
That's a website?
Yeah. I think it's called Conjugamos. Conjugamos.
Conjugamos. Conjugamos.
Conjugamos.
Meaning let's conjugate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mhm.
There's another, yeah, so this is, you know, you guys are learning in the day and age with all these different apps and computer research
Yeah.
and stuff. When I was in college 20 years ago, my favorite tool was something called 501 Verbs or something like that.
Oh, yes, I have the book.
Yeah, 501 Verbs in Spanish. So I'm just going to bring this up on Amazon here, and I'll share
Yes, I have the book.
I'll share the link with you here in the chat feature if I can figure this out. Yeah, that's it. That's the book. So if you don't have, if
Show it again.
For me?
the book again, Sally. Yeah.
Okay.
501 Spanish verbs. So
Yes, and I bought it at my local half-price bookstore for something
Okay.
like $9, I think.
it's a phenomenal resource. I love that.
Yes.
There
Yes.
are still days, I've been speaking Spanish for 20 years. There are days where I still get like, so at some point you start getting confused about, wait a second, what is that? Or, you know, you hear something and it kind of throws you off. So there's still certain days where I'll go to it. I love it because it has the 501 most commonly used verbs in every single conjugation
Yes.
that there is for it.
Yes.
So for getting it, so like, you know, in English, we don't change our verbs. I eat, you eat, we eat, they eat. In the third person, we put that tiny little S on there. He. Past tense, forget about it. I ate, you ate, we ate, they ate. But there's no change. Like, we don't change our verbs. So
Right.
those verb conjugations are really kind of tricky. And so that's why I really like that resource, 501 verb conjugation. So anytime you have a doubt about, you know, you're into... So if you're an intermediate level, Sally, you've done present, present progressive, commands, and preterite, and you're probably doing like preterite and imperfect at this point, kind of the two different past tenses. And so if you ever have a little question, you can just look that up in the book, and it gives you all the conjugations in every single form. Yo, tú, él, ella, nosotros, etc.
And on the bottom of each page, it gives some sentences using the verb and words and expressions related to it. So you can actually get sample sentences with them too. So yeah.
Yeah.
But so yeah, it's 501 pages long.
Pardon me?
It's 501 pages long with one verb per page.
Oh, no. Let me see. There are,
I mean,
there's one, yeah, there is one verb per page, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because there's that many conjugations, and Spanish has stuff that you do not use in English. You get into the perfect tenses, you get into something called the subjunctive that we don't really use in English, and then the pluscuamperfecto, and like there's all, it gets confusing.
Potencial compuesto. Potencial compuesto is verb conjugation number 12 in this book. No idea what that means.
Well, read it to me. What does it say?
Potencial compuesto is verb number 12. I don't know if you can read it.
What did the conjugation say?
Habría, habrías, habría, habría. Oh, that's just, yeah.
Yeah, that's the
Haber.
that's when
Is
you
it
start saying,
haber?
I would have done this. I would
Yeah,
have
yeah.
done that.
Oh, there's your Poochie. Your puppy is in the background.
Yep. Cool. All right. Well, this was good.
Yes,
This is very good.
very helpful.
David, excuse me, since you're here locally, do you have a class, an actual in-person class?
Unfortunately, not anymore.
Okay. So do you do this
up
every
until 2 months ago, I had a full-fledged school with 3 classrooms. We're located kind of close to the airport. What part of town are you in?
Oh God, I'm up near Evergreen.
Oh, you're all the way up in Evergreen. Wow, yeah. I've had students come down from Evergreen.
Do you do this every Wednesday then?
I try to do the tutoring every Wednesday, yeah.
Because this is
And
very
then, and then on Friday we have just more of an open conversation where we just talk. But we also do, so we're doing all of our classes right now on Zoom. Unfortunately, I have had to make the incredibly hard decision within the past week to go ahead and close my school, because we're just with the new, we're starting to get, things are starting to open up, but with the new restrictions, we could only do private one-on-one lessons. We have to do a deep clean of the classrooms before and after the classes, and then hire a sanitation crew to come in at night to completely do I don't know how businesses are going to stay in business, because I calculated all the numbers and it was still going to be a stretch. But the way I figured it, I was going to have to charge at least $100 an hour for private one-on-one classes.
Oh my gosh.
To be able to justify keeping the building, and I would need all of my, the vast majority of my students to agree to that. And that's over double what we normally charge. I normally charge on the high end of things, $60 an hour for private one-on-one lessons. But if you buy kind of multiple hours with me, I discount it down to $40 an hour. So going from $40 an hour to $100 an hour was quite a stretch. And I put the survey out there. I asked my students, I'm happy to do it, but just understand these are not my,
No.
To keep 6 feet of distance between everybody eliminates our possibility to do our group classes. So we do small groups with no more than 8 students, but we have small classrooms. You just can't fit more than 2 people. And think about a 6-foot conference table. That's our classroom, is a conference table with chairs around it, a teacher in the front. And after calculating all the numbers, it's unfortunate. I've been there for 8 years and had to, but
sorry to hear that.
Yeah, me too. It's a shame that I haven't had to let any teachers go. That was my biggest worry outside of going out of business. So we're still in business, and I haven't had to let any of my teachers go. I've kept all of my staff on. But yeah, I do need, we're doing classes online. We never allow more than 8 at a time. Most of our classes, especially Spanish classes, tend to be even smaller, 3-4. It would be very similar to this, only if you wanted to join a class with us, it is a very formalized, everything I did today, that came out of here without using a book or anything. But when we're in classes, it's very structured. We do an evaluation for you, place you into the right level, and then you can join a class, or we can do one-on-one private lessons as well. And that's a great compliment for,
I would like to look at your website.
Yeah, it's, I'll put this in the chat box too. So it's just the languageschool.us. We are offering a free demonstration if you want to try out a class with us. I'd be happy to do that for you to show you what that experience looks like. You can schedule that through the website too if you want.
Okay.
You know,
It did not come up on the, I don't see it anywhere, but it's the languageschool.us.
yeah.
Okay, that's good enough.
I have kind of like split feelings about applications like Duolingo and Rosetta Stone. I actually really do like them, and I recommend them to all my students. What I don't like about them is they put it into people's heads that they don't need teachers. And when it comes to learning a new language, you need this. Without this, I mean, this is the most important part. And so you don't get that from this, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, hiring, you know, working with us, it'll answer all of those unsolved questions that you have. But then keep using Duolingo to practice. I think it's great practice, and anything you can do to help you memorize vocab, and it's kind of fun and interactive, and so I like it for that.
Tommy, I need to do a little commercial here for David's book, which I heard about from this session several weeks ago. And it's a book that he has authored, and it's all kinds of questions to be conversation starters. And what I really like about it is it's English on one page and Spanish on the other, facing pages asking the same thing in English and in Spanish, because he has English students too, people who are learning English, Spanish speakers who are learning English. Here it is. And I ordered it from Amazon.com.
Let's start talking. Okay.
A bilingual book for English and Spanish students.
That's very good. Thank you. Just a quick comment. Where I am, again, the past couple of months, I've really been practicing a lot.
Good.
And probably like Sally, I'm getting to where I can read comfortably. I have to look a lot of words up still, but I'm reading fairly comfortably and writing fairly comfortably. But talking is like water coming out of a fire hose, and I'm trying to get a drink. It's like, whoa.
Yeah. There's several reasons for that, and that's everybody goes through that. So reading and writing are naturally going to be a little bit easier because Spanish and English both share one thing in common, which is Latin. So, you know, something like 30 or 40% of words in English are based off of Latin. And Spanish is just basically an grammatically incorrect version of Latin, like Ebonics is to English or something like that, you know? So whenever you have that overlap, like computadora or televisión or something like that, you know, where we have those Latin roots, it's almost easy, you know, instantly recognizable. And on paper, it's going to look very similar. So when you're reading and you're writing, it looks similar. You're naturally going to understand a lot of it. When it comes to speaking it, though, then you have to take into consideration the accents that people are using, right? And that's something that doesn't come across on the paper. So when you see the word, you know, conversar on paper that looks just like converse, like you're naturally making that connection. Oh, conversar, right? But then when I say conversar, like maybe you think I just said the word con, which means with. Con, and then you're thinking, what is versar, right? Or, you know, whatever. Maybe you do get it. Conversar, that kind of sounds like converse. But, so little things like that are happening and that's why, you know, reading and writing is naturally a little bit easier to do. The only way to get the speaking component is to talk. That's the only way. Duolingo's not going to help you with that. Rosetta Stone, like the only way to do that is to do this. And then also to get exposure to a variety of people, hearing their different accents, because again, in the Spanish-speaking world, people from Mexico talk very differently than people from Cuba or from Spain. And so if you'll get used to one accent, and then you hear somebody from another country and you're like, what? There's a thing that happens in your brain where, so like when somebody says something to you, until you have internalized the language and can speak it and understand it fluently, what is happening is I say something to you in Spanish, and it's like a step-by-step process. You hear it, you try to understand it, you then think about what the question is actually asking you, then you think about your answer, you have to translate it back, and then you have to actually make your mouth push it out there, right? And so it's kind of like developing muscle memory. Like if the first time you swing a baseball bat, it might be pretty awkward. Tommy, do you play golf? I'm no good at golf. I can't play it to save my life. You would think that all you have to do is swing that thing, but the ball does not go where I tell it to do because I don't have the right muscle memory, right? And so you have to develop that cognitive kind of, you have to develop those neurological pathways in your brain that makes it fire the right way. And to develop fluency, there's no secret or trick to it. Fluency comes from the Latin word fluere, which just means to flow unimpeded, like a river flows downstream. And when there's a rock, it just goes around it, right? That rock doesn't impede it. To speak fluently, it means like you're not even thinking about what you're saying. And the only way to get there is to have conversations over and over and over and over again. The only way to do, and you can develop fluency with certain aspects of the language, and then, your day-to-day conversations. You wake up, you go down to the coffee store, you order your, media luna with your cafe. You go to the store, you buy a bottle of water. If later on that day, you get together with your friends, you talk about sports, you talk about like the things that you're always talking about, and you have those very fluent conversations. And then all of a sudden, like the tense that you just mentioned, Sally, where you get into the yo habría comprado el carro si hubiera tenido tiempo. Like that's a very complex thing that's happening there where you're saying, what I just said to you was I would have bought the car if I had had if I had had time.
Yeah.
And so those are areas of the language where you can be completely blank on. And honestly, it doesn't matter because it's very rare that you actually would make a statement like that,
Yeah.
But the only way, like I can do that fluently because I lived in Latin America. I lived there where you're literally being forced to do it every day, every day, every day. And there's no shortcuts to it. You just have to put yourself out there and talk to people as much as possible, and go through, you study and then you go out and you practice it. And like some of the hard parts is when you study it, that's not necessarily the way people are talking.
Yeah.
And then, but you just do it. You just have to do it and do it and have fun with it and have a sense of humor and just know you're going to make mistakes. As adults, we get frustrated too easily.
Yeah.
You've probably heard they say adults can't learn languages. You have to be a little kid. I'm living proof that that's not true. I learned how to speak Spanish as an adult. I was a young adult. I was 18 when I did it. But nonetheless, I was not, and it was excruciatingly painful for me to learn how to speak Spanish. It was not there were a lot of fun times on the way. I can't say that, but there were a lot of just miserable times as well.
Well, you weren't nearly as old as I was when I started learning a language for the first time about 5 years ago. But anyway, and sometimes we have to get out of our own way too, because many of us are perfectionists, and unless we can say it perfectly, we don't want to open our mouths.
And you cannot be a perfectionist when it comes to
no.
your language. It's too it takes way too much time. So communication is something that we very much take for granted.
Mm-hmm.
We can get together and talk. And so it's like when you first start learning how to speak Spanish, you know, if you don't speak any Spanish and you go get on a plane, like what I did in my very first experience before I had learned Spanish, I thought, oh, you got to do Spanish immersion. It's the only way, because I'd taken it for 2 years in high school, and it was by the end of my 2 years in high school, I knew a couple of bad words. I could say cerveza, and I could say baño, you know.
You could probably pick up girls too.
No, I couldn't even get that far, you know. Like, but then when I went to Spain and realized I could not talk to people, I mean, it was humiliating. I had nights like it was just a nightmare for me, because you're literally, when you're going into your new language, you're taking away your ability to communicate.
Yeah.
You might as well be deaf or mute, you know, like, because you can't understand, you can't talk. It's even probably, I don't know if it's more frustrating than being deaf or mute, but the fact that you can hear somebody talking to you and you don't know what they're saying, like it's,
yeah.
I remember I lived with a host family, with a Spanish host family, so like everything about it's different. Their bathrooms are different over there. Their bathrooms are different than ours. They don't have bathtubs. And so like it was showers only. And then they don't, like here with our showers, we have typically like a shower area, but they have a squeegee in there, like when you go to your car wash and you squeegee the water. So anyways, I didn't know this at the time, but apparently after you take your shower, you're supposed to take that squeegee and like come and wipe all the surfaces. And yeah, I didn't know that. We don't have that here, you know. And I'm like, man, this is weird, because I felt like I was just completely leaving the bathroom all wet, soaking wet, you know. And one day the señora came in and started yelling at me, like, you know, like mad at me. And all I heard was ducha, 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 ducha. That was literally all. I'm like,
something about the shower.
So bad right now, or she wants me to go take a shower. I had no idea. I came to learn that was the custom, but there's unfortunately no shortcuts to it.
No.
I would never recommend somebody to do that. I would always recommend somebody study Spanish for a year with me, with a program where I'm going to explain the language to you so that you can understand it, and then go do some immersion trips. Get up to an intermediate level of Spanish. I don't think immersion is very useful if you don't have the right base. Once you get the right base, then it's incredibly powerful, because you have to have a certain level of understanding to make it practical.
Well, good. Because I've been thinking about additional immersion, and I don't know if I'm at the level where I should do that or not.
Yeah, I can do an evaluation for you sometime. I'd love to set up a demo with you and do an evaluation for you. It depends, you know. I really do believe strongly to avoid the experience that I went through. Spanish can be so much fun if it's done the right way. Like once you start having those conversations, you know, when you go into a Mexican restaurant and you say, hola, mesa para tres, por favor, and you're with your you don't speak Spanish, and they're like, and the server comes up and, you know, you order your beer in Spanish and like tip, like they're like, I'm not even going to charge you for the beer. Like such amazing things start happening.
Oh, I know.
It's fun once you start getting it. You're like, I got it. I just.
We were in Mazatlan at the end of February, and we were there for, I guess, 10 days or so. And the longer I was there, the more comfortable I became in, especially interacting with the waiters and so on. The last night we were there, we were in a restaurant. I'm forgetting the name of the dish, moja something or other. We ordered, but by the end of the evening, the waiter had given me his apron. I admired his apron. He said, "Oh, here, take it." But anyway, it was fun.
Two comments I want to get in before we get off. Are we supposed to get off?
We're supposed to get off right now, yeah.
All right.
But no rush. What's up?
Sally, I've come across a website called News in Slow Spanish.
Oh, yes, yes.
Okay,
I'm aware of it. I think it requires a subscription, right?
yeah, $20 a month.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Or
I have
20
not subscribed, but yes, I've heard of that.
Pretty good because they speak very clear. And then the other one,
Yeah.
speaking of ducha, David, this morning when I was in the ducha, I was thinking of that commercial. Aren't you glad you used dial? Don't you wish everyone did? And I got to trying to think, how do I translate aren't you glad and don't you wish? And then I'm going, how did I say that? Aren't you glad and don't you wish?
So the news and slow Spanish thing, I'm glad you brought that up. I recommend. Let me back that up a little bit. I recommend it from the perspective that it's to help you develop your ear, because actually naturally you should understand Spanish before you can start speaking it. So like you have kids, you've seen them learn how to speak, and this has been cool because I have a 4-year-old son. So as a language professor, seeing him learn how to talk, I'm like, man, this is like my theories about the way that this should be done is actually coming to play out, because he could understand me long before he could actually start talking to me, you know, like when he was about 6 months, you know, we would give him like a ball and tell him to do something with the ball, or take something to the trash can, or take his plate, and and he couldn't talk, but he could understand what we were saying to him. And then he started producing sound. So language acquisition comes in various phases, and the first phase is developing comprehension in your ear. So something like, I've never actually used News in Slow Spanish. I know what you're talking about, so I can't necessarily recommend it from the sake of saying it's a great product to go out there and use. But if it is something that can make listening more common, it's a really important part of the process to develop your listening comprehension.
And Tommy, this is another book that David recommended. I don't know if you've heard of this, The Easy Spanish Reader. It starts easier and then gets progressively more complicated through the book. I'm in the middle now in the history of Mexico, and I'm having a little trouble keeping the battles straight. And some of the locations, the towns, the pueblos, the pronunciation of those, I don't know what they are, but
I get that because I love history.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay,
It starts with just a little a couple of college students. They're graduating college and so on. So the first section is that, and then it's the history of Mexico, and then the last is about a famous play. The last section called Se llama.
Don't forget, David. Aren't you glad? Tell me how to say that. Okay, go ahead, Sally. I'm sorry.
Who's Feliz?
I'll come back to that. You want to finish, Sally?
Oh no, that was it. That was it. But yeah, this is another book that David recommended. I ordered off Amazon, and what's nice about it is throughout there are any difficult words are probably translated in the margin of the stories, so you don't have to stop, look it up, and so on.
Yeah.
To answer your question, to say how do you do those kind of negative questions, it's the same as in English. You just say, ¿No estás contento? Aren't you glad? ¿No estás contento?
Okay.
Like, aren't you glad to see me? ¿No estás contento verme?
Okay.
You just put the no in there. That's actually a really common way to talk in Spanish, sometimes kind of annoyingly common, where they make questions negative. It's annoying because when you have to do like sign-ups, and people are always doing it.
Oh.
But they'll like ask you the negative question, assuming that the answer is positive, and I don't fully but it's like so common that it's annoying to talk that way in Spanish.
Are you teaching your son Spanish?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, nice.
Yep, he understands a lot of Spanish.
Mhm.
Kind of resistant to it, just from like when he was going to daycare and where they speak all English there, and his mom doesn't speak Spanish. But
Oh,
yeah, with me, he actually initially started speaking. He could speak more Spanish than he could speak English initially.
oh,
I only spoke to him in Spanish, and then I would
yes.
only put, like, when we watch cartoons and stuff. On Netflix, you can change the language.
Yes.
Not for everything, but for a lot of programs, you can change the language. That's another good thing for you to do. If you have a good program that
Yes.
you like to watch, get it on Netflix and see if you can change the audio settings over to Spanish.
Mhm. Mhm. I will listen to it in Spanish and then use Spanish subtitles too if I'm watching a movie, so that I'm getting the reading and the hearing.
So kind of a good practice for like watching movies, because that's another area too where it's a little bit of a delicate situation, because like in terms of Spanish immersion, if you're not understanding what you're hearing, it really isn't beneficial for you. And I've heard people
Right.
say otherwise, but I completely, as somebody that has been in that pure immersion situation, if you know, like, the first part of learning is understanding. If you don't
Mm-hmm.
understand what you're being taught, it is not benefiting you. So kind of a good thing is to watch a program. Like if you have a movie that you like or something like that, watch it, and then watch it in Spanish with the English subtitles, and then watch it again in Spanish with the Spanish subtitles, and then
Mm-hmm.
watch it again with no subtitles.
Right.
And so you might watch the same movie 3 or 4 times in a row.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
if you do it because you want to make sure you're understanding.
Yeah.
You just sit
I
there
also use the remote and I stop it if I'm not catching something. So it can take me, 3 hours to watch a 1 hour program.
Yeah. Well, try it like that, Sally. Watch it the first time with the English subtitles, and then watch it with the Spanish subtitles, and then watch it with no subtitles. And
Good idea. Yeah.
The news in slow Spanish, you can stop it. You can also back it up 5 seconds or more.
Mm. Oh, okay.
Kinda
Okay.
neat.
They're also on Netflix, some of them anyway, allow you to slow the speed down. And you go down in the settings and you can slow it down. And so I've found that if I back it off just to maybe 75%, it's still a little distorted, but not too bad. But if you go any slower than that, it starts like, dragging like that.
Okay. Well, I hope to see both of you next Wednesday at this same time.
Yes.
Please join us. Yeah. Thank you.
you.
This is very
All right.
helpful.
Gracias.
I'm going to sign up.
Adiós.
Nos vemos.
Okay.
Gracias por ayudarme con mi español.
Oh, wow.
Adiós.